If I'm working with a head coach, even prior to being appointed in a club, but then certainly once you're in that role within an organisation, it's one of the things I ensure that they're crystal clear about, or at least aware about, what are we doing to be aligned here. So there is no there's no surprise, it's no accident that the best organisations over time, so sustainable teams in any professional sport, have alignment.
Today's guest, Darren Holder, is the coach's coach. He coaches those high-level coaches that you would hear about quite regularly. He's going to teach us today some really important lessons about how to avoid imposter syndrome. Through his story, through his experience with coaching, there's also a really important message there around alignment and how important that is for the future success of you and whatever organisation you're involved in. He's coached at the highest level, West Indies cricket, Queensland Rugby League, NRL, AFL clubs, so he knows his stuff. Enjoy the wisdom of Darren Holder. I'm Ian Hawkins, and this is Sport is Life. The purpose of sport, as I see it, is to see your vision become a reality. Find your voice, create strong connections, and learn to trust your body. Hey Darren, how you going?
Good, Ian. How are you, mate?
Going very well, thank you. I won't mention names, but you said you had to bump a high-profile coach that you work with to make sure you were here for this. So I appreciate that.
Thank you. No, he's okay. We'll talk later in the day.
Very good. I used to work with the great man Benny Eichen back at Fox, and he put me in contact with you. I've already had a great conversation with you, and really looking forward to this chat. Tell us a little bit about your youth experience in sport, Darren. Were you someone that had aspirations to play at the elite level?
Yeah. Thanks for the opportunity to chat. I know that Mikey's been a very good supporter of mine since we've come into contact, and it's nice to be able to speak to your audience, and so thanks for the chance. Growing up in Queensland in the late 70s, early 80s, I think everyone played footy and cricket, so that was kind of my path. My parents were working class people, and was really fortunate that I had the opportunity to, go to school and be around some competitive people through primary and high school. And so I played a lot of tennis initially, because both parents were tennis players, and that kind of led me into cricket and gave me maybe some hand-eye skills. Always loved footy, so I played rugby league. It was probably the only code you could play in Queensland in that era. Certainly diversified a bit now. So I was lucky enough to play some junior rep stuff at primary school level that leads you into the pathways, and got an opportunity to play, regional and then state level kind of rugby league and cricket up to that sort of, end of high school. And then you kind of make some decisions. So I pursued cricket for a period of time. All the boys were getting too big and strong for me in the game of footy. So, but knew pretty quickly, I came through a really halcyon era of Queensland cricket when they won their first Sheffield Shield and all those things in that mid-90s period. So played with a lot of those guys that were then stars for Australia in the longer term, the Mars, Love, Kasperwich, Bickle, Simons, etc. So I kind of really turned to coaching at a young age. Was already coaching while I was still at high school in some sports, which was great fun, just as a bit of a holiday adventure with teachers and other people to offer skills clinics, and knew that was kind of a path. So probably made a decision a little bit earlier than some about my future was maybe not as a professional athlete, and going to turn to still being involved in sport through coaching and other things. So I studied exercise science at university and was coaching through that period, and probably thought being a PE teacher was the fallback. So if all else fails, I'll go and be a PE teacher. But I was lucky enough to start coaching before I'd even finished that degree as a regional development person, doing coach education and skill clinics, etc. for Queensland cricket. And then my path kind of took off from there.
Awesome. I don't know if you've heard the story, Ange Postecoglou talking about when I think it was in the last year of primary school, they had a school game and the teacher was just, the assigned teacher wasn't really good. And he basically said he just took over. He was always someone who he loved to coach. I started coaching, kids when I was about 14, 15 as well. So do you find that even at that age, as a youngster, it just kind of came naturally to you?
Yeah, I think, it seems these days that kids aren't as much students of the game as maybe we were in our generation, because they've got so many devices to follow things on. Maybe they just do it in a different way. Maybe that's unfair from me, but we had to read books and really study the game to get better. And I knew that, we had one television in our house and getting with a couple of sisters, getting access to the TV in an afternoon might not have been always the number one priority. So I was out in the park kicking a footy and playing with mates and whatever else. So you're always trying to find little ways to do skills better. So I was kind of curious, and I've carried that forward, I guess, throughout everything that I've done, and tried to even transfer that attribute to others. So I think it's a real key. And really had a teacher who was never my classroom teacher at primary school, who I ended up having a relationship with for a long time as a mentor. And he was helping me out as a young cricketer. He played soccer. We compete against each other on the tennis court and anything that we did. And we were lucky enough then to just do some skill clinics in holidays. So I kind of really enjoyed doing that with him, and it became something that was second nature. Even in the other professions that my mum and dad were involved in, I saw a coaching element. They were just in trade, blue-collar jobs, but they were always looking after younger members, apprentices, and others coming through. So maybe just the type of language and the things that were done to pass on from one person to the other were inherent in some of the stuff that I saw as a young boy, and then grew into as I got older.
Oh, I love that. I think anyone in sport can remember that coach or mentor that came through at just the right time that taught them certain things. I could rattle off 3 or 4 that were quite impactful in my life. And as you said that about your parents, it made me think about just how many of those sort of coaching skills that I would have witnessed and had role modeled to me. That's really powerful. Can you tell me?
Butcher, and you think, how do you learn to be a coach from dad being a butcher? And came from the Darling Downs, where sport was really interesting as a pastime for those people, but working in an abattoir and but always being one of those senior people, like a senior person in a team. You're always passing on your skills to someone who hasn't had the level of experience or knowledge or amount of reps that you've had. So it was something that I probably didn't know at the time, but it was certainly prevalent when I look back now. Yeah,
really cool. And being able to identify that in our parents, which we often look back at our parents and we know the good things, but we, especially growing up, we tend to focus on what wasn't good. So it's good to get to a more mature age and reflect and see the good stuff they did teach us.
Yeah.
So tell me, that particular mentor that you mentioned, what was it about him? Like, what did he teach you that was so impactful that's still carrying through to this stage in your life?
I still remember even hearing things. His wife's a teacher as well, and she wrote books for young children. Just some of the personal qualities that he displayed. So even so much as we did have mobile phones, so answering the phone when I pick up the phone, because he'd call the home line, and just how I would receive the call, or even when I needed to call him, who was living with his wife's parents at the time. He was a young teacher, and asking correctly. So just manners, being respectful, thanking someone for picking you up in the afternoon and taking you to training, which you could do back then. As a teacher, I used to go and train with men. He was playing first grade cricket in Brisbane, and I'd go and train with them as a 12 and 13-year-old, and we continued a relationship. And just, I guess, building the little values that are true to someone over time. When he built his first house, I remember digging holes that he'll never forget to plant the trees that now become part of the forestry around his house. So whether it be work ethic or respect, just simple manners, the little things. I don't necessarily remember him teaching me how to bowl an off cutter or an outswinger or where to, but I do remember the conversations we'd have driving to and from training in Brisbane back in those days when, I was just a pup and he was someone who was trying to, work his way through the cricket pathway.
So good. So what I didn't mention at the start when I first introduced you is that you are a coaching consultant at the highest level. You're currently doing work with Swimming Australia before they head off to the Olympics. You've worked with NRL, across cricket, most of the major codes in Australia. How do you go from having an interest in coaching to then being able to be in that space where you are literally coaching the elite coaches in Australia?
Yeah, it's a bit of a journey. And I guess I've got to thank cricket for that in terms of the opportunities that they presented me. I did what I'd call my apprenticeship with Queensland Cricket through the 90s, and we were lucky to have really good coaches. John Buchanan was the head coach at Queensland at the time that became the Australian head coach, very much ahead of his time. And from there, I took up an opportunity to go to the West Indies, and growing up watching them be so dominant in cricket was remarkable. And then to be able to go and work with some of those people in the Caribbean and live there for a few years as their coaching director was another experience. I'd always believed in walking the walk, not just talking the talk. So you have to go and seek opportunities to be better. So for me, growing on my coaching career, I needed to get into different environments, and I felt that Queensland offered me a tremendous foundation, but I wanted to go and learn more, and that needed to be probably internationally. So I had that opportunity for a couple of years in the Caribbean, then went to India, and so coaching director, looking after all the territories and all the coaches coming through their pipeline, if you will, including their first-class coaches and national team coaches. And then the one box that I hadn't ticked and was highly unlikely in a competitive market here when you've only got 6 teams in the Sheffield Shield, no BPL back in those days, was to be a head coach of a first-class team. So I went to India and did that kind of on the back of relationships that I built through a lot of the coach education and development work that Cricket Queensland and Australia had been doing through the early 2000s. I was offered an opportunity to go and, I guess, with a clean slate, before IPL came on the table, go and do that in India. So I coached and was the director of cricket for a team who were, for the audience, who don't know India, a bit like a Queensland country team or a New South Wales country team playing in national competition. So if you think about, let's use rugby league as an example, you've got the Broncos in Brisbane, you've got the Cowboys in North Queensland, and this team would have been called Queensland Country, based in Toowoomba, playing in the NRL. That's so Maharashtra was the name of that state team, and poor minnows to the Mumbai's and some of the bigger teams in that state. And we had an amazing 2 years where we got players into Indian teams. We won an All India under-19s, and we did a whole lot of good stuff. Being the first non-Indian to ever do anything at that level over there, so kind of broke the mold a bit just prior to IPL. Yeah, and it was good fun. So we put a whole lot of good processes in place that I know held true over time. So for me, that was good. Came back here because I was starting to settle down, and we were thinking about kids. Worked in a school and a university and a few other places, and then got back towards working with Cricket Australia. So I was doing some part-time work with Cricket Australia that led to a more permanent role. Fortunate that some other mentors and great colleagues in Belinda Clark, who I've known for 30 years, former Australian women's captain, and then Pat Howard was running the high performance program for Cricket Australia. They really championed the cause that we needed to invest in coaching and coach development. So I was able to sort of lead that coach development arm, or if you like, part of our elite coaching for a period of 6 or 7 years across national teams, but also down into the States. So to answer your question, give listeners a little bit more context. Cricket, then when you're working, I guess, with a national body like that here in Australia, it gives you tentacles into other sports. And you probably, detect from my upbringing, I always thought you could learn lots from crossing over into other fields. So I was certainly promoting that within cricket. We needed to get people out of cricket in order to help them get better at cricket coaching. So working with AFL clubs or the AFL or NRL and different coaches, as well as then looking at things more broadly outside of Australia when it came to performance and professional sport, became a real passion to push that forward. So we did a lot of crossover. I'd been traveling a lot, obviously, through that period into the Caribbean and India, so had made a number of connections internationally, and we just started to push forward with some crossover and cross-pollination that I thought was valuable. And I guess that gave me the impetus to think beyond cricket for myself and then move towards where I am today, working across multiple sports and in a little niche sort of consulting business.
Awesome. There's so many things I want to dig into there as a cricket fan. Before that, you've given me the fast version of all of the highlights.
Yeah, just a little tour around the world.
Tell me about how hard, was it hard facing the fact that maybe you weren't going to make it at that elite level that maybe you thought you would, and then having to transition into the coaching? Was that easy, or were there times where that actually had a significant impact on how you were feeling?
As an athlete?
Yeah.
I love sport. It's great for every young Australian to be involved in sport. And these days, girls and boys have so many more opportunities than we probably did growing up.
Yep.
I think it's a great vehicle to teach, life skills and be parts of teams. I think if we're honest with one another, and maybe, one of the big parts of what I help coaches with today is reflection, and being good at reflecting on experience, knowledge, interaction with others, etc. And I think maybe I was okay at that when I was younger and realised that if I look in the mirror, I'm probably not quite as good as the bloke standing next to me or the guy down the street, So I was realistic. And then another thing that I think is so important for all coaches, but anyone, teams, individuals, is knowing where you're going, like having a vision of what it might look like. And maybe that's something I'm just fortunate to have had, that I was pretty clear on what I wanted to do and where I wanted to go. The dream of maybe playing cricket and putting that baggy green on or putting on an Origin jersey would be wonderful, yet maybe not realistic when you look at the talent around you and you work hard. You can only work so hard. I think I was, had a fair crack, but knew that maybe I could offer more in another area. So had a vision for what you might be able to do to make coaching better and help advance that cause, knowing what I'd seen then post, obviously, the athletic career is coaching is so well regarded around the world, but not necessarily as much here in Australia. So almost got an obligation, I believe, to try and advance that and be a champion for coaching and what coaches do, because I think we can all think back to a moment in our childhood as young sports people where coaches had a big influence on our life.
Yeah.
And that shouldn't be, suppressed or diluted at all. They're really important figures. So to help elevate that is really, really important.
Yeah, I love that. Love that. And particularly in a community level, it's important that those people who are having such an impact, one, have the skills, but two, get that acknowledgement for it. Because you think about how many of them are doing it, volunteering, they're giving up their time, and I think, I know there's a heap of really positive work we can do in that space to get more of that. I imagine, oh man, this has got to go for about 4 hours, Jason. Have you?
It was funny you said that. Do you look back at the playing career? I've got a mate who we've both got kids now that play touch footy together. He was in the Queensland under-15 team that I was a shadow for at rugby league, and we were laughing the other day because we can't even remember playing against each other in rugby league, but we certainly remember playing cricket against one another. He remembers opening the batting against me, opening the bowling, and having to face that. But he played in the second row and went on to have a short NRL career. He played for the Steelers back in those days, and a number of the players from that 15s team went on to get contracts as young players and play a little bit of footy. And he said, do you kind of, look back and say, I wish I had been named in the team or not? And I think they named Paul Bowman instead of me, and he played Origin, so they probably made the right decision.
Yeah, probably. I think I just got caught up in the West Indies cricket thing and called you Jason, but not Jason Holder, Darren. So, Darren, you talked about direction and vision, and I know how important that is for sport, but it's also important for other areas of life. At that same time, were you putting that same focus and priority on making sure you had that clear direction and vision that include your personal life? You said you were married, you're talking about having kids. Did you make sure you had that going across all areas?
Yeah. It takes you time. It takes time for us all to mature. Individually, I was really clear from a young age that, I said it right from the start, I went to university, and being a PE teacher was a backup. I was going to coach. I knew that coaching was really important. I had opportunities to move towards that. And then, you've got to earn your stripes, and you can maybe one day climb that ladder. But when I saw opportunities that were in front of me, I was really clear on what I needed to do to get to where I am now. And building those experiences, I think, the sum of, the experiences you have in life. So if you can put good experiences together and learn from those and reflect upon them, you're going to be pretty well placed to grow and become a better human. I was lucky that my partner, we've been together over 20 years, and we met in sport. So fortunately, she understands how sport works. She doesn't work in sport anymore, but had some foundation working in sport at a level when she graduated from university, albeit in the marketing and sponsorship area. Yet she knew what sporting teams and organisations, how they operated. She was involved with teams that had won premierships here in Australia at professional level. So that was a good thing that she understood my need to chase some experiences at an early stage. Yet I also needed to acknowledge the fact that when the time came, it was probably important for us both to have some stability and work on what that might look like over time back here. My departure from the Caribbean was actually her father passed away, and we had to change some personal circumstances. So it became a bump. I was certainly intending on staying there for a little longer. That didn't take place and came back. But then within a period of stability back home, was able to then reset and take up the opportunity in India, knowing that was also just going to be a piece of the puzzle. It was never going to be a long-term appointment or engagement. It was just going to be for a period of time and then get back here. So having conversations obviously about that and knowing where we're going and what it might look like, you've got to get other people on the journey, and she was certainly part of that journey and has been and will be and continues to be.
Yeah. And I love how that's sort of mirrored what you've talked about in the sporting context, is that things happen and you need to reflect and you need to adjust, and it's true for sport, it's true for life, is that not everything is going to go exactly as you want it to. In fact, it's guaranteed. So having that ability, that word you've used a few times now, to reflect, and then of course take the necessary steps, that's great advice. Tell me, moving from that place into a coaching, like from that elite sport at a youth level, and knowing that some of those guys that you played with went on to that highest level, were there moments of self-doubt around your ability to pass on those messages and to get the right results that you knew you wanted?
It's a good question, very good question, Ian. Because people do talk about that imposter syndrome. I was talking about it with a coach just last week when he went into Origin camp and having to stand in front of the group for the first time, knowing that some of these players had played more games at that level than he had. I think if you do your homework and preparation and know that you have evidence, which has always been a very big, a very important piece for me. There are lots of people in this industry and certainly across all industry that don't have empirical base or an evidence base to support their narrative and dialogue. I've always had the evidence behind what I'm going to talk about, whether that be statistical, if it's about a certain element of a game, or whether it be coming from the research when it relates to coaching science or psychology, whatever that might be. It's about doing your homework. So knowing that you have, maybe if you don't have the experience personally, that you have some knowledge of what is important that sits behind that to draw upon. So roundabout way to the question, I feel like I've walked into rooms when I've had at arm's length relationships. Running high performance courses for cricket is a good example, and I've got some of the greats of the game sitting in front of me who are now transitioning towards coaching, and we were fortunate that they, in cricket, if you wanted to work at the highest level, there was no cheap ticket to the top. You had to pass through that filter, if you like. You had to do that course to even be eligible or considered for working with Australian teams. But for me to build relationships with those former players who are now coaching, you need to know your stuff. You need to know you have your ducks in a row and know what they've done, how they've done it, know a bit more about them personally, and be able to call on that and use those examples to get them involved in the conversation. You don't have to know it all, but you need to know how to navigate a conversation with people who might have higher levels of knowledge, performance, experience than you.
Love it. And I love what you said there about evidence, because when people are looking for confidence, it's the message that I'm passing on as well. It's like the confidence comes with evidence. It comes with your experience. So sometimes you just need to actually go out there and do it, right? So you talked about that uncomfortable situation of standing in front of a group of elite athletes. You have to do that for the first time. And the first time you do anything, there's going to be some doubt. I think that also is the body's way of kicking you into gear and getting you prepared to be able to take it on. So I love that. Go out there and do it, get the evidence, and that's going to help you move past that self-doubt. I'm curious, because we're going to ask about John Buchanan. Was he someone that came in, you said he was before his time, a lot of the things you're talking about before your time as well, right? Like an Aussie in India, for example, it's just common practice now. Did he come in with a whole lot of evidence-based practices? I know he wasn't everyone's cup of tea, but did he have that evidence? Is that why he was so good?
100%. Yep, without doubt. And he was the first to start the analytical nature of the way that cricket has become, more and more like baseball. There were some people that were part of teaching coaching in Brisbane that he knew that sort of started a system, a company that became the backbone of all sports analysis in Australia and still used by most NRL clubs and AFL clubs now. There's obviously a number of products on the market, but they were capturing live, the data, and then being able to ball by ball analyze trends, patterns. And John did that before anyone had even thought about it. And, then that was able to be ingested and digested to create little insights, I guess, that became part of then future strategy. So I still think back to when we first, and things haven't changed. You still need to hit the top of off if you want to put the ball in the, Flamo would say the corridor of uncertainty or the avenue of apprehension. And we talk about that all the time. But if you're able to bowl 3 maiden overs in a row, then there is an opportunity for a wicket. Like, it might not create a wicket, but it will create an opportunity. That was in 4-day cricket at the time. So it's going to be the same in Test cricket. Now that T20 things have moved a bit more, you're not going to bowl 3 maidens, but if you can build some pressure, then you create some uncertainty and decision making for the batter. And that's what it's all about, I guess. So he was extremely good at having things to back up the narrative that he wanted to present, and then just be so well organised and planned, which I think prior to John's time in cricket, it was, see you at the bar after training, we'll have a beer and a smoke, sort of thing.
Which is why perhaps some of those more larrikin type players didn't necessarily get fully on board with what John was trying to achieve. What also struck me then when you were talking is that the commentators now who are really rising to prominence, they know the data, they know the evidence, they know why players do certain things. And and they're not talking like through that old school lens. Now, there's elements of the old school that's important, but the more and more that sport goes down this space, it's like they do start to sound quite dated when they're talking. So that you've given me some context to why that is, right? Which is why I think back to Brian Smith, the NRL coach, who I'm hoping to get on here. I used to love listening to him talk, and I think from what you've said today, that's wise, because he always brought evidence and he always gave clarification around the things he would talk about, which fascinating. So I love that you've made it, you've shown how important that is. Now, on that, you were in the West Indies when they were still a power. What evidence did you see there? Yes, there were certain things that were already in place. Yes, they do have a certain culture there that meant that they had that ability and they were very good at when they played flamboyantly. But what evidence did you see there that you knew Australian cricket needed more of, that you brought over when you came back to Australia?
Maybe what I saw a little bit of, and to begin with, was why they weren't successful and what was the reasons that they were successful in the period prior. So they were just about to fall off a little bit when I was there in the mid 2000s. I started in 2004 in the Caribbean. Brian was still the captain, Brian Lara. They had some great young talent, but there was some fragmentation that was starting to appear between the territories. You know, and for those that don't understand, some of those 6 territories, like our 6 states, are independent countries and islands, whereas others are a conglomerate of islands. So it's quite unique in terms of the situation. What I was able to identify really early through those that had been in that halcyon era when they were so dominant through the 80s and into the 90s was that all of those players primarily grew up in England. Like, they played all their cricket in England. So the nursery for West Indies cricket was not the Caribbean.
Huh.
So, and that's kind of the misnomer. Until you there and observe and understand, their facilities are poor. Their even the environment in which people grow up was more and more dictated to by the British until there was more independence that was given throughout that time, and then that takes a generation to take hold. So not that independence is a bad thing. I think that it's certainly a right that those countries have to stand on their own 2 feet, yet it creates other challenges for them. And it also then started to slow with plane travel around the world and talent coming from other parts, and even the laws of immigration into the UK changed. So there were less and less West Indian players being picked up by leagues and counties to do their their foundational years and, you know, play lots and lots of cricket to ply their trade and learn the game to grow into becoming, you know, international stars. You know, World Series cricket probably kicked them along as well with, you know, what Packer did in Australia. Yet, you know, Gordon Greenidge grew up in England. You know, Viv played most of his cricket in England. All those bowlers, the Walshes and the Ambroses, and they played so much cricket in England to become the greats that they were. And then international cricket just went and exploded, right? There was a 12-month calendar. They never stopped, and that was foreign to everyone. So it took a while for the dust to settle and people to work out where they were actually going to get better, because just playing, unless you've got really good mentoring and guidance, exposure is not enough. just playing doesn't mean you'll get better. Some will improve if they've got good people around them to help them to identify the things that they're doing well and continue to do, and maybe work on those that aren't and their gaps. But the system for cricket in the Caribbean was so challenging whilst I was there to produce talent, and there was inconsistencies across the system. So with inconsistent preparation, you're probably going to have inconsistent performance. You're still going to have some diamonds in the rough. Yet they don't have enough of a base in terms of the pyramid, in terms of playing numbers. There's not as many people playing cricket in the Caribbean as you think. They're playing soccer and basketball and other things. And even as technology improved, then so did their access to media, and their proximity to the USA provided them, I guess, with some visibility for what was an American culture and lifestyle rather than what they had grown up with, being very influenced by the British. So things started to shift and move in a different direction. So I think it's never one thing yet. The bottom line was that the nursery for Caribbean cricket had been kind of removed or moved away, and then culture had shifted over time as well. So
yeah, fascinating.
Yeah, you're back here. So what did I bring back? I guess a really clear understanding of don't throw the baby out of the bathwater. If things are working, then make sure we keep doing it here. And the development was a really key piece of the puzzle, whether it be for players or for coaches. You need to have a systematic development process where you're building a strong base if you think that you want the talent to continue to rise.
Love that. Fascinating, just thinking about like how England was providing that base for them, and probably about that same time they went on a bit of a dip as well, I guess, in a lot of their sports. Like think about football, they were providing an incredible base for all these other countries, but not necessarily nurturing their own. A lot's changed since then. Even their football team is at world-class level there, although some may argue that, but they definitely will be in and around it at this at the Euros, and the cricket team has obviously risen a heap in that time as well. Really interesting. And also what amazes me is like we saw the West Indies out here last year is like just how much ability they still have, and yet you're saying that they're pulling that from such a small base. There still is that potential if they can unlock the right pathway. Anyway, that's not for us to solve at the moment, but I love just like that, the dynamics of the cultural shifts and so on, and then how you adjust, because it's something that no doubt Australian sport's going to have to deal with. It's what you described before. They've got access to so many more options to see so many more different things, and there's a generation of athletes coming through who aren't necessarily so fanatical about their sport. They just happen to be really good at it. What you talked about, how they were made up of a whole lot of different countries, and then they've got all these different factions. What was the biggest frustration that you had to deal with and navigate as the coaching director in that space, and how did you bring them together?
Yeah, another great question. Getting from one place to the next was enough of a challenge. I remember sitting in an airport a whole day to try and go to see some games and not getting there till the night after they'd finished. So there's an airline in the Caribbean called LIAT, L-I-A-T, and it stands for Leave Island Anytime. So it's just one of those you have to navigate. Just the travel around the place was tough. Understand that when you're an independent island country, then you've got your own education system, police force, military, currency. There are so many different national products, if you like, and national entities. They're not all aligned. So alignment is something in sport that I couldn't elevate higher than being, it's probably in the top 2 or 3 priorities for any organisation. Alignment of the key spine. So when you've got a board over there that's made up, the West Indies Cricket Board, of people from maybe 8 or 9 different countries, that's hard to start with. And then once you get to that point, you've got the chair or the president that then rolls down through the CEO, who's going to be from one, to have that person not seen as being biased towards his nation of heritage. And then you've got other employees. So in some ways it was easier for me being an outsider coming in to help than it was for some of those people that would come from some of the Caribbean nations that were working for the board. So alignment, and it is somewhat federated, like sport is in Australia, in that the territories make up the organisation, like our states do in some of our national team sports. pulling in different directions is then difficult, right? Because everyone wants their piece and wants to do it their way. So having people on the same page and heading in the same direction is the next challenge. So they were tough. The coaches were thirsty for knowledge. They hadn't had any attention, any feedback, any opportunities to have people around them. And I'm proud that the guy that's now the coach is someone who never played first class cricket or played a little bit for Jamaica, was a rough, tough kid in Jamaica when I first got there. And I said to him, I said, mate, Andre, you need to really knuckle down here and be in this for the long haul, because you'll one day coach the West Indies. And I'm really proud that he is coaching the West Indies now, because even still through that period, they were names, they were getting people from outside, internationals.
Yeah.
And he's been in it for the long haul and continued to ply his trade and skills, and took opportunities to coach their women at different times and their academy, and different experiences that have led him to be able to lead the West Indies now, and that's great. But it takes time. It takes time for coaches to build their craft. And so the question, alignment hard, getting people on the same page. But then when I was able to spend time with the coaches and provide opportunities for education and growth and development and feedback, they lapped it up. They were always really, really receptive, because they hadn't had a lot of that previously.
Fantastic. I'm fascinated around the alignment. It's something I've done with businesses. How do you go when in a professional sports space there is a business element, there is the spine of the coaching group, there's the spine of the team. How do you go with that alignment piece when there would be certain things, I imagine, above your area of control? What sort of influence can you have there?
If I'm working with a head coach, even prior to being appointed in a club, but then certainly once you're in that role within an organisation, it's one of the things I ensure that they're crystal clear about, or at least aware about, what are we doing to be aligned here. So there is no surprise, it's no accident that the best organisations over time, so sustainable teams in any professional sport, have alignment of their leadership spine. And I think it's the one thing that undoes us more than others. I was in a forum with looking at high performance systems recently, and that was the thing that I highlighted as one of the points that I think is still unknown, or that we need to do more for, because it holds high performance systems back. So if you have the chair of the organisation sitting on that board or committee at the top, however it's structured, and then through your CEO or that person that's leading the organisation across all parts of the business into whatever department, if it's a baseball department, or basketball department, football, cricket, the head of the performance director, if you will, or general manager, and the head coach, and even to the captain, that spine being aligned, then you're half a chance. If you haven't, then there will be a certain amount of energy that's spent trying to get those people aligned and get them on the same page. Now, you certainly want disruption at certain levels, and people with diversity of thought among your coaching and sports science and performance staff and everything else, I think. But in terms of vision and where you're going as an entity, as an organisation, that needs to be clear. Now, how you go about it can have some inputs at different levels and different stages, but you want everyone heading in the same direction, at least pointing the boat where we want to go together, and then knowing what that looks like and what success is. And if we have different views of what success is and where we're going, it just makes it harder to get there. It just makes it so much harder. Talking about John Buchanan, and I think he was able to give that really clearly to the Australian cricket team, and they wanted to set a mark that, overcome what the West Indies had done in that previous generation. And that was for him. He used the analogy of, what's our Everest? And he still uses that to this day in terms of his own consulting businesses. So what is that for us, and get everyone on board with a picture or an understanding of where Everest is and what we need to do to get there and how we're going to do that. And then we'll go about filling in the detail, but without a vision for where we're going and then alignment towards that from all parts of the organization just makes it so hard. So I look at the San Antonio Spurs are terrific at it. The Melbourne Storm are very, very good. Like, you've got teams that probably pop up. The period of time when Richmond was dominating the AFL, people will move and times will change, but they had clarity of that group. And I used to see them when I'd pop into certain locations in Melbourne. They would meet regularly, and I'm talking about the chairwoman, the chairperson, the CEO, the head coach, and they'd be all together having breakfast regularly. And you might say, well, that makes sense. Well, yeah, but it's not that common.
Yeah. I think about how you see it play out in the media, and the Swans is the other team that comes to mind. Is it just teams, and Geelong, they've had sustained success, and that's the first thing. You know how they play, you know what they stand for, what they don't stand for, and then you also see those sort of perennial strugglers, and you see that there is an alignment. There's always infighting, and even some of those teams that have a bit of a mixed level of success, you can tell that there's something not quite clicking at one of those levels. Having that right personality, like there's only so much you can do. How important is it to have that right personality in one of those positions to be able to help lead in that space to make sure that alignment continues?
Yeah, I think having everyone understand their role, like the clarity of role and where you fit is important, but also people just being able to leave their ego out of it, right? Like too many times we get clouded in sport because we have passion. That's why we're involved. It's great to be involved with the games that we love. Yet boards in sport are probably less like they are in industry, successful business, where you will have a portfolio of people who have different strengths from different fields who are supporting decision making for the CEO and others around them. Now, we have people sitting on boards in sport most of the time who love the club or the team and want to be there, but they're there because, and that sometimes their judgment is about, it's passionate and it's really invested in the entity, but they will have opinions as well, rather than just being able to offer expertise in their area of specific knowledge. So that makes it harder. So I think people need to understand we all have roles. We're really clear on those roles at all the different levels, and that everyone's in it for the same reason. That's why the vision is so important. That this is what we're getting after, and if we're not doing stuff that helps us to get there, then why are we doing it? So not being distracted by that, and keeping the main thing. The main thing is critical for everyone in that journey.
Love it. You mentioned having that vision. It's so crucial. What about that sense of purpose? Like, does that why play into the vision, or is that something that you actually would set up for them separately?
Yeah, I think, yeah. So they're probably tied together. Vision for me, and certainly spend a lot of time with coaches understanding this for what they're trying to do with a certain group, is based on who and now, like what we can get to over a period of time, knowing what you have at your disposal and the assembly of a squad or a group or whatever it might be. Purpose is really longer term. Hopefully it's a bigger picture thing. So vision might be more seasonal, if you want to talk about it in business language, more of an operational plan, whereas purpose is the strategy that's, much more towards the future. Why do we exist? What are we here for?
Yeah.
And the organizations that are really clear on who they are. So the purpose probably relates a little bit more back to identity. Who are we and why are we here? And then the vision is then now how are we going to act that out and what's achievable now with who we currently have. So we want to try and have alignment between those two things also, which allows you to the purpose piece underlies everything and really keeps you on track, hopefully, when things are going tough. And
yeah, love it. We've talked a lot about those skills that you use in sport, and also, we touched on the impact of the vision and direction and taking that into your personal life. What's apart from those areas, what is something that sport has taught you that has just been so prevalent in your personal life and been so positively impactful?
Yeah, I instantly go to relationships and people.
Yeah.
There's nothing like being in a team, and I think that brings a different dimension to who an individual can be. So having interactions with others is a really important piece of being involved in sport, but it's certainly something that then I think I've been able to learn has helped with the way that I go about what I do currently in terms of supporting coaches and being a learning partner with coaches. I certainly don't see myself as being a mentor necessarily. I might have some experiences that I can share, but if anyone asks, what do you, well, I see myself as a learning partner. I'm learning just as much as the coach that I'm working with might be, and trying to help them navigate things better, because I might be seeing it a little differently, looking at it from a different lens than being drawn into the weeds. So the relationship, to be able to get to know the person and be able to be there with them, alongside them, not above them, or just standing side by side, shoulder to shoulder. I think that's something you do in sport, and I try to do now in what I've learned to be a support agent and a learning partner for coaches and performance staff, or whoever it might be, CEOs and others working in organisations. They all want the same thing. They all want to see their team win at the end of the season.
Yeah, so good. And that's everything I've learned, whether it's coaching people through business, in a job, in a sporting environment. It's the same thing, right? It's like you're in there together with them, and there's always learning when you're the coach. There's something will happen. Some unique individual you're working with will always show you something where you're like, oh wow, like I hadn't thought about it like that. And I think that's one of the beauties of it from like a personal perspective is like you're imparting knowledge, but you're getting so much of that back. Like even today, right? Like I'm getting so many great ideas just from your story. And I think just thinking about it now out loud, it's like that's one of the powers of this medium, is you're not just sharing your story, like you're sharing what you've learned. You're sharing lessons that other people can learn. And yeah, I appreciate the depth you've gone into today, Darren.
I know, it's just scratching the surface. But I think when you mentioned that too, Ian, like, you talk about story, not that I've tried to craft anything to that, but I think if coaches can learn to build a story about who they are, their identity, where they're going, and then even that transposes itself into clubs, and what is the story of us, and tell that story. It helps people to see where we've come from, where we are, where we're going really clearly. So yes, storytelling has been something that culture across, our Indigenous culture or other cultures around the world has been so important for generations, well before us, and will be there well after us. So if we can embrace that as coaches within our own small patch right now, it's going to help us to certainly project the messages and the narrative clearly, and using a variety of different ways, whether it just be as a narrator, or if it be through visuals and words and language and other things that support that artifacts as well. I think it helps to build that cultural element, which is so important for teams to tie into.
Yeah, well said. And my thought straight away goes to the impact that our storytelling has, because we think about what you just described about these ancient cultures. They knew it. They've been passing on stories for thousands of years. Like what can we take from that? So I know as a coach, I do a lot of storytelling to my children. Some they would enjoy more than others, but I'm just interested. You've got kids, right? Like, how do you apply that sort of same storytelling element to you as the dad?
They well, the reflection and the storytelling, the two pieces they probably dislike the most. As soon as we get in the car on the way home from footy or netball or water polo, it's like, how'd you go? And they know it's a loaded question straight away, right? And I'm just trying to get them to think about how they went and talk to me about it, and they don't want to talk. So now I've got to the point where they've said, Dad, ask us if you're allowed to ask questions before you ask the questions.
Nice. So boundaries.
Yeah. So it's like, can I ask you a question? And then if I get a yes, then we can start to dig into it. If not, just leave them alone and we'll come back to it. But the storytelling, I think, is the other part. I'm one for context, and maybe listeners have picked that up. I don't think it's easy to understand the whole without understanding the parts that kind of go with that. So sometimes my stories can be 2 steps back to take 1 step forward, which the kids dislike. They don't want all the context. They just want to get to the point. It's, fast food society with phones and Snapchat and everything else. But I do think that having in a sporting situation, some knowledge and respect for what's come before you is really important to shape a more meaningful attachment to the identity of what we're trying to project. So that's certainly helped with what I do in a professional position, but personally I've still got to work out when to bite my lip and just get to the point.
I think we all are, right? As parents, we're always learning. I don't know if it is just necessarily social media and having a device, because I can remember having that same frustration at my mum when I was like trying to learn some assignment and she's like trying to give me the whole backstory. I'm like, Mum, just give me the answer. Like, I don't want to know how.
Cut to the chase. Yeah. Kids, they just want to move on to the next thing. Maybe that's what it is.
Yeah, that's it. Yeah, maybe that's a whole other conversation around the school system. But anyway, So everything you described is just so positive and the impact it's having for people. What do you see as the best impact that sport has, whether it be at the elite level, whether it be with your youngsters at that more of that community level? Like what do you see as the most positive impact that sport has for us as a society or as a community?
I see sport differently. I'm fortunate that I have traveled extensively and spent time in other cultures where sport probably means different things. Comparing us to the US, we're not a recruitment sport. Like, sport is not about recruitment in Australia per se. It's about development. We just don't have a population that allows us to be churn and burn, right? They do that all the time. So, and then as a result, it becomes quite transactional. And you could say that for round ball football, soccer as well, that it looks like a transactional sport. I think tennis is quite transactional because of the way in which it generates the dollar, and it's a business from an entertainment perspective. I think by and large, sport in Australia is still tribal. Like that's part of its. So it teaches us those team skills that we take into other parts of our life. It's temporary. We don't stay necessarily in sport our whole life, but it's an important part of what we do in our life. So that to me is the fabric for Australia. We get behind our tribe, and our tribes are many. It might be that we support a tribe in the summer, in the winter, in different sports, or multiple tribes in the winter across different codes. And then when it comes to an Olympic year like we are now, we'll get behind any Australian that's doing well across all the sports. The Olympics certainly is an expectation when it comes to some of those larger sports like cycling and swimming and others, hockey perhaps. So I think it gives us some purpose for our nation as well to guide us forward. And kids, it gives them the dreams, to be able to go out there and play, which fun. We live in a great climate most of the year, where we're lucky it's the sun shining, so kids can get outside and compete, so that they can dream about one day being those idols that they see representing in professional and or Olympic sport on the biggest stage. Yeah.
Oh, I love that. And what really struck me about that is that how much it teaches us, particularly from that national level, is that we can rise above a perceived level of what people think we should achieve. Like Australians have done that in sport for centuries now, just like overachieving. That's a great message for everyone, is that just because there's a perception that perhaps due to numbers or any other restriction you can't, there's always a way. Always.
Definitely. Yeah. Yeah. It's and it sends the tingle down your spine, doesn't it? It gets the hairs on the back of your neck stand up when you see teams that are doing well for Australia and or your club of choice. You know, excited by it. So it brings us passion. Yeah, it's great.
Yeah, and I think about as a long suffering para fan, the amount of years where I've gone, you get to the ground, you're like, or you're getting ready to go, and you're like, do I really want to go today and subject myself to this? But then you get there, and then the crowd starts walking in together, and it's that sense of belonging, that you're part of something, the energy of the crowd. There's nothing like it. You described it, whether it's at a real local level where you're connecting with other people to that sort of tribalism. There's nothing like it. And I remember Roy Masters talking about, and he's someone who's quite intellectual, and he said, there is no experience in life like those 5 minutes in a change room after you've won. He said, nothing can replicate it. And yes, it's winning, but it's more than that. It's like you've been in something together as a group for a higher purpose, and to see that come to fruition, magic. Like you said, it's the spine tingling stuff.
Yeah. I mean, I was in a change room on Sunday here in Brisbane at a rugby league, one of the QRL senior matches, and I know they just reminded people of part of their purpose. For that particular game, there was one of the players in the team had lost a family member, someone else's birthday, and there was another fact. You know, there was three things that just gave them a real sense of why we're going to get the job done today. You know, like, so I think we have lots of little examples of that every Saturday and Sunday, whether it be in netball and football, cricket. It gives us a sense of coming together, like you said, belonging to a cause, and we're trying to achieve some stuff together, which is remarkable. And we've probably, as a nation, always thought of ourselves as the underdogs, and that being hard to achieve. So let's, you know, get after it and you know, show people that we can. So like I think there's a real sense of achievement and pride in doing that, which is tremendous. You know, like it's great.
Yeah, and I think about the impact that can have on the young people. I remember just down at the local level, one of the parents coming up and saying how when we got assigned, when we were playing in the top team there, we got assigned to some of the junior clubs, and like how they're, you know, him and his son and his mate's son still talk about what an impact that had for them. And this is the opportunity for people, is like, you can just create a lasting impression. You talked about it when you talked about that mentor that had left such a lasting imprint. Like, never underestimate the positive impact you can have from those moments of lifting someone else up, right?
Yeah. I've got a really close friend who's a sports psych. He's 82 and lives on the West Coast at Santa Cruz in California. And we always talk about your influence is never neutral, just to that point. And it's such a great line, you know, like as a coach, as a parent, whatever you do is either having a positive or negative impact. So if you can just keep that in the back of your mind, that your influence is never neutral, it certainly puts you on the right path to make sure you present yourself in the right way and have the right energy and body language and demeanor and interaction with others that helps give them something positive that they walk away from that interaction, rather than it being something they don't want to return to.
Yeah, fantastic. Well said. You do a lot around evidence-based, and a lot of that would be technical, and a lot of that would be team and elements. How much work do you do in that mindset space to getting them prepared from a mental perspective to tackle whatever it is that they've got coming up?
It kind of depends. So I must be honest. And the organisation or the team or the coach needs to be ready for it. Some people maybe shy away from mindset because it's not something that they are able to understand clearly and how it can impact a group. But then when you are open and ready for it, it's certainly something that you can start to have a real thrust towards. It's just since last weekend, one of the fun projects that I work with is the PBR, Pro Bull Riding. It's certainly a pro bono thing, and I just have been lucky enough to spend a bit of time with bull riders over the years and think their courage is remarkable. Like, to get on the back of a 1-ton animal and try and hold on for 8 seconds is borders on crazy, right? So one of their more experienced guys in New South Wales, who's been a great servant of their industry and what they do, is now the captain of the in the middle of an Origin series at the moment, just like we know in rugby league, where they pick riders for New South Wales and for Queensland. And their team captain, who's starting to dabble towards coaching, if you like, because there's not really coaches in that sport, is trying to shift their mindset for this weekend in Newcastle. So we've been talking for the last week just about how we might do that and how he can maybe ask them some questions to get them thinking a little bit more about what's important rather than what's not. So to answer your question around mindset, I think, if we can have small little thematic ideas that help bring, again, just like a vision, the vision is longer term, a bigger piece, but the mindset is then about creating small stimulus to align a group for a particular point in time or a small period of time. That's certainly one way to give us clarity in terms of our own performance and role in that performance, and also just to ensure that we're paying attention to the things that matter rather than the things that don't, and not being distracted by those things that can hold us back. So there's so many important mental skills that we could discuss, and I think sport is now embracing mental skill and mental performance development more with open arms. Once upon a time, you saw the sports psychologist, and in Australia we call them that, which is probably at our detriment. In other parts of the world, they call them mental performance consultants. So for me, it is about mental performance. It's part of performance, and what we do above the shoulders is just as important as the physical guys that we have 5 and 6 in every club that prepare our bodies for the weekend. Now, we could invest just as much time when it comes to the mental side of most games. Not, there's some that will happen automatically, and in many cases the coach is the deliverer of that. The head coach is the person that's delivering that message and very, very well skilled at it. So to provide a coaching resource that might have some mental skill, mental performance training, can be better than going back to the sports psychologist, which is, in our medical deficiency model, you go and see them when you've got something wrong. Well, I don't think we actually want to be enhancing performance rather than going to see someone when we've got a clinical ailment that is probably needs to be referred to a specialist anyway.
So it's rather than being, it's true in sport and all the other areas, why wouldn't it be mentally, rather than being reactive, being proactive with these things? Correct. So that we're always ahead of the curve. That's cool.
Definitely. Yeah.
And I love that what you mentioned in there around the mindset is a lot of things you've already mentioned, which is the vision, which is around evidence, around relationships. That they're all part of it, right? And
knowing the individual, so knowing what triggers might be able to just reset and recalibrate that person to allow them to have clear thoughts, not allow them to get in their own way, keep them out of their own way, and let them move forward with some freedom to have some joy and certainty about what's required.
Yeah, well said. Darren, I really appreciate you giving us a bit of insight into who you are and how you operate. I've taken a lot of fantastic learning out of this, and I know that the listeners would have absolutely as well. I appreciate you giving me this time, especially when you're in the middle of quite a busy time with Olympics coming up and so on. Thank you very much, mate.
My pleasure. Anytime. Thanks, Ian.
Cheers. I love the answer Darren gave when he talked about the tribal nature of sport, on how sport teaches us the concept of team, of backing our tribe, connecting with our tribe, and how that can map across all areas of our life. Definitely add that to your game plan. Also add the piece that he talked about around alignment. You need to have a really clear vision of what success is for you or for your team or for whoever you are involved with, and you need to have everyone heading in the same direction. So add that from a personal perspective and have a think about, for your game plan, how you can apply that to whatever team or organization you're involved in. Now, if you haven't already, please make sure you subscribe. I want to get even higher quality guests than Darren, if that's possible, because that was a cracker. And by you subscribing, setting Apple to automatic downloads, all of those things help me to get in front of more people so I can continue to share these awesome messages with you. You've taken the time to listen to this whole episode. Now it's time to take action. Commit to one thing you've learned today and make it happen. And to avoid any obstructions, join the Sport is Life movement by clicking on the link in the show notes.